What's up, guys? It's Coach Gaglione. It's another edition of the Powerlifting for the People podcast. I got a very special guest on the line, Herbie, the love bug, Andrew Herbert. What's going on? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
For those that are listening that maybe aren't aware of who you are, can you tell us a little bit about like who you are and what you got going on right now?
All right, so I'm currently a competitive powerlifter, raw powerlifter in the 242-pound weight class. I'm an Animal Pack athlete, sponsored by Animal. I represent them. Also sponsored by Elite FTS. I lift out in California in the Bay Area out of Boss Barbell Club, which is run by Dan and Sparkle Green. So that's my home gym. Yep.
Cool. So I want to kind of rewind a little bit and maybe just kind of hear about how you got into fitness, how you got into lifting. Did you play any sports growing up? And just tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So it's kind of been a long, windy road. In that, from a very young age, I had this kind of visceral obsession with strength and muscularity, size, whatever, stuff like that. And it was probably the common thing that everyone seems to share in this sport is Arnold, but Sylvester Stallone as well, and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Those are kind of the big guys that I was really I want to look like those guys. And so so I was doing calisthenics at a very young age, got some dumbbells at a very young age, started lifting at a young age, but I still played all the normal sports. Growing up, it was baseball, soccer, basketball, that stuff. The sport that I ended up in high school getting very kind of focused on was wrestling. So that's my what I consider my root, my foundation sport is wrestling, and I did that through high school and through college, a little bit after college, and that and so after college, there's not a whole lot of competitive opportunities in that sport, and not a lot of income generating opportunities. So, and I also didn't want to just be a wrestler either. I mean, I got my education. I figured I could use it to some degree. So, I worked some odd jobs, kind of figuring out what to do with myself. And so, if there was a several year period where I was, trying to basically, as they say, quote unquote, get into the real world, and I'd go to the gym. And for a while, I was getting also really into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a grappling art. But basically, after I moved down to San Jose and started working a lot, and so I just was going to the gym, and it's this disconnect that I still can't figure out. But I knew powerlifting existed. Obviously, I knew bodybuilding existed and all that stuff. I knew strongman existed. I'd watched it on ESPN late night as a kid. But I knew I loved lifting, and I knew that I had good, genetics, horse strength. But I never thought, I should put two and two together and actually compete. So it was guys at the gym who got me to do my first powerlifting meet, and I was hesitant at first. Actually, I even kind of blew them off at first. But once I did that meet, and that was February of 2014. I mean, that was a light switch. I mean, I loved it. It went really well. It was so cool. And from there, I just kept competing, joined Boss, training, and going from there.
Can you tell me about what your first meet was like, and do you feel like you were prepared? Like maybe if you remember your numbers, what was it like getting on? Obviously, you have a lot of experience training up at that point, but obviously getting on the platform, as you know, is a whole different animal. And what was that like for you?
Absolutely. Well, and it's apropos right now because I was signed. So normally that meet is in February. It's at Old School Iron Gym, which is in Vacaville, California, which is a awesome gym. Great people. They put on great meets. And that same meet, the Pacific Coast Open is what it's called. And I was actually supposed to do that meet this coming weekend. And I was, and they just announced this afternoon that it got canceled. Which I totally get. And I emailed them as soon as they emailed me. I said, hey, I get it, man. I love you guys, and this makes sense. But I was hoping for it to be like my 6-year anniversary. My first meet, and kind of looking to potentially have almost exactly 600 pounds on my total since the first meet there. Which would be it's just kind of the numbers.
Yeah, it's cool.
Kind of cool. So my first meet there was I made all 3 squats, and so my third squat was like 535 to 540, somewhere in that range. I forget the kilos exactly, but now bear in mind, I didn't even have a belt. Everything was beltless. I was in an old wrestling singlet, Converse All-Stars. Really, the only thing I had that was powerlifting-ish was I just ordered some SBD knee sleeves, because someone said, "Oh, hey, get these are good," and they're good. Bench, I made my first bench, which was like 365 pounds, and I missed my second 2, which I went up to like 385 or something. I missed those. And then deadlift, I went 3 for 3, finishing with like a 635, I think, deadlift. So the total was like 15. It was like either 1535 or 1540, somewhere in that range. And so I ended up winning best overall lifter at that meet, which was pretty cool. I didn't even know it till well after the meet. I guess they emailed me. They're like, "Hey, we forgot to give the award for best lifter, and you won it." I was like, "Oh, all right." But it was cool.
So I know you kind of mentioned, you kind of glossed over it, but you said since then you've kind of added about 500 or 600 pounds to your total. For those that don't know, I guess I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. I guess maybe 3-4 years ago, we had a nice little battle with Larry Wheels for the 242 record. You ended up coming up on top. I think you totaled like 2091 or something like that in the 242 class. So can you talk about like your progression a little bit, and maybe like some of the records that you've held, and maybe like what's been some of like the keys to your like progression like over the years?
Absolutely. So that the showdown with Larry and where I met you, was August 2016. So that was just to give a time reference. Yeah. Those Boss Bosses 3, hosted at Boss Barbell Club, my home gym. That was a great meet. I'll get into that as I talk about the progression. So after my first meet, and that was a USPA meet. So at that time, keep in mind, each thing I'm doing is like my first, so I'm just learning. So at that point, the only federation I know about is USPA. So I, look at their website and all that stuff, and they had nationals coming up in Vegas. So I was like, oh, I'll go do that. I did that. Then they had Worlds, like IPL Worlds, in the winter, and I did that. And those were all at 220, by the way. I should say that. And so my first 242 was the LA Fit Expo at the beginning of 2015. And, because as I was getting those quote-unquote newbie gains, I bulked up pretty fast to where 220 wasn't feasible anymore. And then the LA Fit Expo. And that I didn't compete again until Boss of Bosses 2, which was the Boss of Bosses meet is always at the end of August. And I've done it every year. So Boss of Bosses 2. And that was the meet where I broke 2,000. So that was kind of a big landmark meet. Sure. And then I didn't compete again until a year later at Boss of Bosses 3. And that was pretty cool. Like it was my second, rivalry in a sense, like that, where it was like on social media. I knew about him, he knew about me, and stuff like that. Like my first had been when I was doing the USPA meets. Luigi Fagiani, we were similar numbers. Like he was ranked because he'd been in the sport and I hadn't. So that was the first one, and we became good friends from that. I give Larry a lot of credit because watching his training leading up to that meet motivated me, and talking to him, I know vice versa. So, and then, we met, did the meet, he totaled 2090-ish, which was the world record. And then I got 2094, and the record had quite a journey, so Dan Green, my the guy who runs the gym I train at, had it at, I think, 2083 for several years. Then just a few months before, maybe even 2 months before Boss of Bosses, John Rivas broke that with 2087. So that was the first time it changed in a long time. And then Larry and I rapidly did that. And so, that was a great meet. And that's when I met you and all that stuff. And so that was pretty cool. I think that was probably the meet where that was my first world record. And it was the one I guess, where I got that taste in my mouth of it, and which is both a good and a bad thing. Where I guess I started to think, man, yeah, maybe I'm like pretty good at this stuff. But it felt good. I want to replicate that feeling, and so from there, the next meet was U.S. Open, and that was my first wrapped meet. And that was it was supposed to be another showdown with Larry, and Kevin Oak, and all three of us ended up. That
was like there was some bad juju at that meet for the 242 class. Everyone went down.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a curse on that meet, and so, in that meet is during bench is when I blew out my arm, and so that was a big turning point that still affects me in the sport, and so then it was a lot surgery, rehab, and all that stuff.
So I want to pause there for a little bit because I'm not so obviously this is the thing that people maybe younger lifters don't realize it's kind of like. They say if you go to war, you might get shot. At some point, you're gonna, so if you're gonna put a heavy barbell on your back or in your hands, you're taking a risk, even if you train intelligently. So maybe, were there any kind of signs leading up to that, or do you think that was a freak accident? And then how do you have any advice for people to kind of maybe if they're overcoming an injury or something like that? Because obviously since then you've come back and you've done some great things. But maybe what was kind of going through your head at that point, and what advice can you give to somebody that's maybe going through a similar injury like that?
Yeah, so it definitely wasn't a freak accident. It was a long time coming, to be honest.
Yeah.
When I was talking about my competitions leading up to that, the reason there were such long gaps between them, between LA and Boss of Bosses 2, Boss of Bosses 3, and then US Open, was that I was having a lot of elbow pain.
Yeah.
Which as I progressed through prep and into the heavier weights and all that stuff, it would get extremely painful. And and I had a MRI, so actually I knew I had a partial tear. So I was also trying to kind of minimize the damage while still, doing what I need to do to win. And so it was kind of you could call it an existential dilemma, where I had tried wrestling it. I had gotten PRP injection, and according to the doctor, that was the best that could be done. And I basically just had the fork in the road of I can either stop benching or all pressing movements, or I can keep going. And at some point, this very well could snap off. And I chose the latter. I don't really regret it, but if I knew how catastrophic it was going to be. I had experienced injuries before through wrestling, and I'd had surgeries before, and so that got me sort of mentally prepared. And not even back in the day, I'd started doing a lot of time, thinking about all the things I can do if and when I'm laid up. You know what I mean? Because the worst thing is to be hurt and be like, "Well, I got nothing to do," and feel hopeless. There's always something you can do. So I even wrote down lists. I remember in college just to know that if I got hurt, I'd have something to refer to. But in retrospect, knowing now what I do about the damage it caused, I would have been more aggressive about taking time off and resting. Because it's all about time. And for me, I'm one of the older lifters in the open class, and so part of me feels this sense of urgency of I want to do as much as I can, and so the thought of taking many months off of pressing movements just seemed unfathomable. But it broke, and I had to take months off, and still have the muscle damage that impairs my left arm. So, what I would recommend, especially to the younger lifters, because you do have time, is aggressively address those kinds of injuries, and and that's not to say be a hypochondriac or anything too. The movie The Program, greatest football movie ever in my opinion. There's the scene where it says, "Are you hurt or you're injured?" Yeah. It's important to kind of know that difference too, because this sport isn't golf. There's things are going to hurt. And you gotta confront that and push through the discomfort, but then also listen to your body and know when it's the kind of hurt that needs to be addressed. With backing off and treatments and whatnot, and that kind of takes time too. It's we can't just get an MRI every time something hurts.
Right.
To know what's going on.
Cool. So obviously you've healed up. I know you still have some issues with it and things like that. But I know I watched you at Slingshot Record Breakers, like a giant squat and and kind of some other meets. So can you maybe talk about like what your progression's been like since the meet and like how training and competitions have been going since the injury?
Yeah, absolutely. So so that injury happened at my very first classic raw meet or wrapped squat meet, and so. I've been wanting to get into wraps for a long time, and and so it was cool. It went well. Like I had a good squat at that meet, a 400 kilo, and so I'm trying to think. Okay, yeah. So that the injury happened. Obviously, I was off for a long time, so I didn't do another full. My next full meet was a year later at the U.S. Open, or the Kern Open as they call it, 2018. So that was kind of like, I saw that as like a symbolic kind of vengeance type thing of, I'm coming back. And so it was wrapped again. That meet is all wrapped, even though Larry does it in sleeves and still wins, but, everyone else does it in wraps. And so that was I said I broke the squat world record at that one. And that was my first like single lift world record. So it was the record had been 909, and so I chipped it and did 910. And that's the squat that I'm most proud of out of all my lifts.
That was a beautiful squat. I remember that, and I mean, you sunk that one, and it was you grinded it, and I remember the walkout was rough, but
oh yeah.
I think you had to take it twice, right? Didn't you? The walkout was messed up, and yep.
Yeah,
so I remember that was wild.
That because so I ended up. As on paper, breaking the wrapped squat world record 2 more times after that. The last one's, controversial, but all 3 of those, I make my opener, I try for the world record on my second, I fail it on my second, I do it again on the third and get it. So it's kind of a weird, like, I don't know if that's, I try to be superstitious, but sometimes it's hard.
Well, you see the pattern, but I think it's also a testament to your mental fortitude, because I think one of the things that I know I've learned as an athlete too is like you got to have like short-term memory, and you got to like worry about like it doesn't matter what happened the attempt prior. It's like what are you going to do in the next one? What are you doing now? So I think that's really good. And I think it's, like I said, it's a testament to you as an athlete, and also, like I said, not just your physical strength, but your mental strength. So maybe this is another kind of good piece of advice to maybe talk about is like after like a miss like that, like what's going through your head, and like how do you kind of come back mentally? How do you prepare for like the next lift? Because obviously you've been successful after a miss. What's kind of going through your head, and how do you kind of get ready for your next attempt in a situation like that?
Absolutely. So I think there's 2 kind of modes of thought in those moments. You got 10 minutes probably before the next lift, and one is, and probably the most important one, is technical. Where were the mistakes?
Right.
And if you've got good, objective, third-party people who can chime in and tell you, things, that really helps. Like I know, So, and I had that all 3 times. After the first one at the U.S. Open, Kevin Oak actually, gave me some pointers, and it helped. Which I thought was pretty cool. Because we were competing against each other.
Yeah.
And then the next one at Boss of Bosses 5, Jesse Burdick gave me some pointers that helped. And then for the last one at Slingshot, I know Jesse talked to me, and I think 1 or 2 other people did. Little pointers. I mean, it's, obviously we're talking about minor details, but with that much weight,
it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, like exactly. Maybe your feet were a little too wide. Maybe you're standing a little too forward in the mono. Maybe you dipped a little bit forward at the waist coming out of the hole. Like just those minor things. Like that's really important. But at the same time, the second mode of thought, is addressing the emotional aspects, for lack of a better word, and that's
right.
And that's kind of where, like what you were talking about, like you can go the negative route and like, oh, I failed, or oh, that weight, the weight beat me, and that kind of stuff. Or what I choose to do is go the positive route and get kind of angry, get fired up, but be like, see it, this is an opportunity to prove myself, to prove my mettle, to prove mental toughness, to prove that I can overcome this obstacle that obviously is a formidable obstacle because I just was unable to do it, and and so just get kind of more fired up from the temporary defeat.
Really, really well said. Do you have any kind of final words for advice kind of for people getting into the sport, maybe things that you wish you had done when you kind of get started, or maybe like really common mistakes that you see like a lot of beginners make, whether it be in person or on social media, maybe it's in Boss Barbell Club yourself. Like what's some general advice that you'd give to somebody who's kind of starting in the sport to help ensure they have success long term?
Oh man, yeah. So that's a great question. I think that's important. You know, like the youth are the future of the sport. They're the future of everything, and thankfully the sport's growing. So we're seeing more and more young folks get into it. A few things that I would definitely recommend. One is, you know, as the sport's grown, there's a lot of double-edged swords. When anything grows and becomes more popular, because it brings more of the masses in, which there's good people and bad people, you know, and there's opportunists as well. And so, you know, there's all kinds of new products, you know, marketed at people and stuff like that. And some of them are absolutely good. Some of them I absolutely use and believe in, but not at the basics. You know, the basics are smart, hard training, good nutrition, recovery, you know, technique. I mean, that's where it's at. I mean, that's 95+%. You know, what type of knee sleeves you have, what type of shoes you have, what velocity meter you use, you know,
Yep.
That's all just and I would so do not sweat those things early on. I mean, you know, get yourself your shoes and your knee sleeves, but I mean, as hard as it is, it's probably impossible at this point, but I'd say stay off social media, or at least, you know, don't use it. You know, I see kids like filming every single one of their lifts, you know, and
It's too
posting
much,
it
yeah.
on. It's crazy, yeah. You know, it's like let yourself develop. Don't worry about other people. And don't scrutinize too much. You know, like, yeah, filming sometimes to look for technical issues is good, but don't go overboard with it. I would say if the young people don't cut weight, you know what I mean? Like I other than my first meet, and even that one I cut a little bit of weight. Like I've always cut weight, you know, but I have a wrestling background, so I've weighed in, you know, probably upwards of 300 times in my life for competitions, and so I'm very comfortable with that. And some other people are too, you know, so go for it. But especially when you're young, like you got so much growth to have that, you know, and there's already enough to worry about psychologically with the lifts itself. So just I would say don't worry about weighing in until at least, I don't know, a couple of years into the sport, you know, where you feel very comfortable with all other aspects, and then address weight cutting if you want. Since I had a long background in training, and I'd always been kind of a nerd, a geek of the sport, so to speak, of lifting in general. I mean, not just powerlifting. So I've read tons of articles and watched all these videos, and you know, I came up before the internet, so I was reading actual books, you know, and you know, Flex magazine and just, you know, all those things. So I felt like I developed a very good foundation of knowledge. So I just did my own programming and kind of winged it based on my own thoughts for years, actually, up until recently when I started training under Josh Bryant. And yeah, and he's a great guy, and I'm really glad I did that. And I wish I had done that earlier. And I would almost say I think people should do that from the beginning, because you want that guidance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I see it with Larry and you. You know, I mean, anyone knows that Larry's got phenomenal genetics. I mean, he's just got the base there is off the charts. But even then, you know, it needs guidance.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that's what you've provided over the years, and it's shown. And so, I mean, heck, you know, Mike Tyson had Cus D'Amato. You know what I mean? Like, the best have Michael Jordan. You know, had Phil Jackson. Like, it's, you know, so. But setting the foundation is the most important thing, and so you don't want to develop bad habits. I think having a good coach is important for that. And so, the last thing with that, I would say, is that don't just have any coach. You know what I mean? Like, as I was talking about the opportunists who flood in when something becomes popular.
Yeah.
Everyone's an online coach now. A lot of them have no business being online coaches. So, you know, I would look, you know, what results has this person accomplished? What have their lifters accomplished? What do other people say about them independently? That kind of stuff, before you actually, you know, sign up with someone and give them your money.
I think kind of going back to what you said originally when you talked about not sweating the small stuff and then talking about like what constitutes a good coach. What I see in this day and age now, I see a lot of online programming. I don't necessarily see a lot of coaching going on. As you know, like I'm like at the meets with our guys and like I'm like physically like there handling them, cueing them, providing them feedback, making sure they're not a basket case if they miss a lift. I think there's a lot of little things that go on besides just handing you a piece of paper and saying, like, I want you to do this many sets and reps. There's like a lot of little things that go into it. And as you know, when you're at your level, it could be like the smallest little wrinkle or detail that goes wrong in a big squat. If you have 900 pounds in your back, 400 kilos in your hands, little things make a difference. And sometimes just having that eye there and also knowing your lifter and caring about your lifter. Because like I said, like obviously, I've been kind of coaching Larry on and off, at least for his powerlifting stuff, not his other ventures. But for the last 6 years, and you get to know somebody, you kind of get to know like what their tendencies are, like when they miss, how they miss, what they need psychologically, what they need nutritionally, what they need from like support, and I think all those things like make a huge difference. So I think that's really good advice for someone coming up for sure.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, 100% on that. I want to kind of frame what I had said where I talked about doing my own thing, but keep in mind, I had Dan Green there always. One of the greatest powerlifters of all time.
World record.
Great coach.
Yeah, world record holders in your gym. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So while he wasn't necessarily doing my programming, I always pick his brain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've always felt very fortunate that I have that opportunity, and just in the Bay Area, California, more meets I'm exposed to. There's a lot of folks, in areas where there aren't those resources, and so those are the ones I think about when they're as far as looking for coaching from an external source. But that's a good point too. Yeah, programming is not coaching. It's a mix of the. It's part of it. But especially when you're learning your fundamental techniques, it's important to have both.
Yeah, and then to your point about like training at Boss, I think like also like the environment you're in is huge too, and the people that you surround yourself with is huge. So I think that's all great stuff. Andrew, it's been like great having you. Where can people kind of find you, and maybe if you want to tell people a little bit about Boss or like where you're training, and maybe just anywhere, any like kind of links or social media you want to share, just let the people know that are listening where they could find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Instagram is my main personal social media platform, so you can find it under my name, which is Andrew Herbert, or my handle, which is Herbie the Love Bug. The love part is spelled L-U-V, and there's no spaces or underlines or whatever, just straight up Herbie the Love Bug. I'm an Animal Pack athlete, so there's stuff on the animalpack.com website that'll talk about me and other great resources and great products on there. It's pretty much, it's IG, Animal Pack. I train at Boss Barbell Club, which is in Mountainview, California, which is like an hour or 45 minutes to an hour south of San Francisco, just to give a reference point. It's a great gym. They take drop-ins, all that stuff. You want to talk to Sparkle. She kind of runs the show and all that stuff. And, great training environment. So I do my best to respond to DMs as well. It can be hard, and I have a full-time job. I'm busy, but I do try. I really appreciate the correspondence with the people, and so I try and respond just for what it's worth. Cool.
We'll definitely give Andrew a follow if you're listening, and if you're in like kind of the San Jose Mountain View area, I think Boss Barbell and Dan Green, they got great resources, great gym, and the Boss of Bosses is definitely one of the more fun, exciting meets that I've been to and I've coached at. So definitely check that out if you're kind of in the West Coast area, or if you want to fly in for it. I think it's definitely if you want to travel, it's definitely a good experience for sure. So you guys can check out the links below to help support the podcast. If you want to support it, give it a 5-star review. It helps other people find us. And until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.